All right. All right, we are live. Thank you everyone again. Welcome to our bi-weekly webinar session. It is again Josh and Stephanie here helping guide you through any of your questions or concerns. And let me drop Slack so that doesn't happen again.
You're echoing, Josh.
Yeah, beautiful. Good start. But yes, thank you all for coming. Today is going to be our multi-channel sequences session. So we're going to be talking about how to capitalize on things like SMS, calls, LinkedIn tasks, and utilizing all of those different channels in order to, I'm echoing. Do you hear an echo, Stephanie? Yes. Yeah. I don't know what causes the echo. I don't have anything else going on here.
Okay, I think you're good now.
Okay, interesting. Again, sorry for that technical difficulty. the beauty of the internet. But yeah, so
start over, Josh. Start over.
Yeah. Stephanie's going to be taking you guys through just the different channels within the reply UI. And then I will pick it back up talking about the best ways to utilize these in your sequences, what to do, what to avoid, and then going a little bit into Zapier and answering any questions that you guys have about that. So hopefully, without any further ado, I will pass it off to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Josh. So like Josh mentioned, we are talking about multi-channel sequences today. So multi-channel sequences are just a really great way to increase engagement among your prospects. So Josh and I have both been at Reply for 5 years. When we started, we were an email sales engagement platform. About a year ago, we introduced different channels that you can include in your sequences, like I said, to increase that engagement and to increase that personalization piece as well. So within the multi-channel sequences, we offer emails, we offer cloud calls, SMS steps, WhatsApp, LinkedIn steps, Zapier steps, and tasks that you can include in your sequences. So we are going to go through a quick campaign setup where we are going to include multiple steps and multiple channels. A couple things before we get started though. If you want to use the cloud calling feature or SMS steps, you would need to enable cloud calls on your account. So I'm just going to walk through those settings and how you can enable it, and then we'll hop into a quick campaign setup. So I am going to share my screen. All right. So if you are going to be using, like I said, cloud calls or SMS, a couple things to keep in mind. In your account settings on the black bar in your Reply account, if you go to account, make sure that you have a contact phone number listed on your personal information, and you'll understand why in a second. I'm going to hop into calls on the left side right here. So this is where you can enable the cloud calling feature on your account. So cloud calls is an additional paid feature. So we have partnered up with Twilio to create that bridge call or connection from the Reply UI to your prospects. So in your account, if you go to calls and enable calls, it will send a prompt to our support team and they will enable the cloud calling feature on your account. You will then be prompted to rent a phone number from Twilio. And like I said, this is creating that kind of bridge call connection. There are some other options in terms of the numbers that your prospects will see when you call them. So this local dial option, so what this means is if you turn that on, your prospects will see a local number, a local area code, conducive to them. So I'm based in Toronto. If I was calling a prospect in Vancouver, a 604 area code would show up for them. You also have custom caller ID. So what this means is you can actually input your mobile phone, your work line, whatever number you want your prospects to see, and that's the number that will show up when you call them. Inbound call transfer. So what this means is if you were to call a prospect using the cloud call feature, if they missed your call, you couldn't leave a voicemail, and they happen to call you back, if you have inbound call transfer turned on, that call will be rerouted to the number in your account settings. So that's why it's important to have your phone number listed in your personal information if you're going to be using cloud calls or SMS. So I am actually going to go through a quick campaign setup. We're going to create a test multi-channel sequence. It's going to be pretty simple and straightforward. So I'm going to hop into sequences right here. I hope George doesn't mind that we're using his account. I didn't tell him we were using it. So I'm going to create a new campaign.
You should know.
So I am going to start from scratch. I am going to give this campaign a name. So I'm just going to call it multi-channel test. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a sequence step. So like I said, these are the options that you have when you're creating a multi-channel sequence. So the default will be email, but like I said, we have the cloud call option. This is SMS. There's a WhatsApp option, a LinkedIn option. So this LinkedIn option, it is semi-automated, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. With the LinkedIn option, you do have 4 options that you can choose from. So you can choose a view profile, a connection request, a message, or an end message. There are Zapier steps that you can include, which Josh will talk about in a few minutes, as well as tasks. So if you include a task in a campaign, for example, some of our SDRs will use, they'll create a task to maybe research the prospect before they include a phone call in their campaign, just so they can have a more personalized conversation with that contact. So for the first step, I'm just going to create an email, like I'm sure many of you have done many times before. So here we go. This is my subject. This is my content. I'm going to save that. And now for my second step, when this saves, I'm going to create a LinkedIn step. So I'm going to select LinkedIn right here. As you can see with this dropdown, these are the options that I talked about. So I'm going to create a view profile step for LinkedIn. So I'm going to click profile, and I'm just going to put in a quick description, and I'm going to save that. So right now we have an email going out on day 1. We have a view profile going out on day 3. For the third step, I'm going to add a phone call. So I'm going to click call. And so right here, you can actually create call notes. So if you're calling a prospect or a group of prospects, and maybe you have a series of 5 or 6 discovery questions that you want to ask them, you can create a call script that will populate when you go to call those prospects. So I'm going to save that. And then maybe for step 4, I am going to add another LinkedIn step. So I'm going to click on LinkedIn. And for this step, I want to do a LinkedIn connection request. So with a LinkedIn connection request, you can even type a message. Hi, it'd be nice to connect with you. Whatever you want to write, you can include a message on that connection. So I'm going to save it right there.
And just to throw in one little note, this is not best practices, what Stephanie's doing. She's just throwing some together for the sake of the test.
Yeah, we are going to talk about best practices after we kind of go through this quick setup right here. I just wanted to kind of show you how you can add different steps to your campaign. But yeah, we'll definitely talk about best practices in a few minutes. So one thing to note, if you are going to be using any steps that are not emails, calls, LinkedIn steps, tasks, SMS, I would recommend using our Chrome extension in tandem with the Reply UI. So if you haven't had a chance to download our Chrome extension, it is a free download from the Chrome store. And let me move this Zoom bubble. And it's going to appear as a reply icon in your Chrome browser. So I'm just going to open the Chrome extension right here. So you'll see right here that I have some tasks that are generated. So as I said before, LinkedIn, it is semi-automated. So in this situation right here, I have a prospect, Olga, who has reached that LinkedIn step. So I'm going to click on Olga right now. So as I can see, it's a view profile step in the campaign. So I'm just going to click view profile, and it's going to open up Olga's LinkedIn profile. There we go. So now in order to complete—
One more part about that. In order for this functionality to actually work, you do require the profile URL in the LinkedIn field within reply. Otherwise, it will run a search for Olga Zamatina, just to hopefully find a copy of the person that you're looking for. Otherwise, yeah, for the most part, to get the most out of the platform, you do need the profile URLs in advance to go directly to the page you're looking for.
Yep. So in order to complete this task for Olga, so Olga moves on to the next step in the campaign. So maybe that is a call or an email. I just need to click complete right here. And that's going to move Olga on to the next step in the sequence. So right now there is a call due in the sequence. So in my Chrome extension, I can see that I have to call myself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click the call icon right here. So I've moved on to the call step. I'm going to click call. So earlier I talked about the 3 number options. So you have the rented number, you have custom caller ID, or local dial. So you can select which number you want to use to call that prospect. So I'm going to use the local dial right here. All right, so once you finish the call, you can select a call resolution, so positive, negative. You can also select the option to snooze that call. You can insert some call notes. If you speak to the prospect and they say, hey, you know what, sorry, I'm not interested, you can finish the contact in a campaign. We can log the call, or we can log and complete the call. And so by completing it in the Chrome extension, this moves that contact on to the next step in the multi-channel sequence. So I'm going to go ahead and do that.
We did get a question here. Just what happens if they call the local number back?
So earlier on, I had mentioned that if you have inbound call transfer on, I would always recommend using that. If you are using cloud calls, the number will be redirected to the number that you have in your account settings.
Yeah, so it's not going to just go to some random voicemail inbox. It will go back to the number that you've specified in your main account settings.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then you can see right here, I have one other task that's due. So Josh has moved on to a WhatsApp step right here. So if I click send WhatsApp message, it's going to open the WhatsApp web app, and then you can complete that step in the web app right there. So one thing that I would keep in mind when you are creating a multi-channel sequence, pay attention to your campaign settings. So I'm just going to click next. And then, actually, you know what? I'm just going to go to sequences right here. So I'm going to open this campaign up again. We're going to, there we go. If you go into your campaign specific settings right here, pay attention to the settings under calls handling and tasks handling, and I'll tell you why. If you open up calls handling right here, the default setting to handle call steps is set to manual. So that's what I was doing in the Chrome extension. I was manually marking the contact as complete so they would move on to the next step of the sequence. If you're in a situation where maybe you have 75 people in your Chrome extension that you're scheduled to call, they moved on to that call step, and maybe you don't have time to call all those 75 people, but you want to ensure that they receive the next step, which may be an email 3 days later, you can change this to automatic. If you change this setting to automatic, the platform will wait for the allocated delay and then automatically move those contacts on to the next step in your sequence. The same thing applies with tasks. So if I scroll down, if I open up tasks right here, so tasks would be anything like WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Zapier step, or a task. You can set it to automatic as well, and then they'll automatically continue on in the sequence. And the reason I want to mention this is, a lot of times we are talking to customers and one of the big questions is, my prospects aren't getting the next step in the campaign. And that's because it's been set to manual and they haven't actually been completing the task in the Chrome extension. So just wanted to point that out to you. One other thing that I wanted to point out, if I go back to sequences right here, so you can call contacts within the Chrome extension when they reach that step in the tasks. So I am actually going to go to another one of my campaigns. Here we go. So this is the multi-channel sequence that I created in my account. If I go to the People tab right here, anyone who is scheduled to receive a call or has moved on to that call step, you will see them in that to call filtered list right here. Right here, I have all the contacts in this campaign. So if I click on my profile right here, I will see that there is a contact phone number. I can actually call from right within the UI using that call icon right there, or if I hover over, there's a phone icon there. I can place the call that way as well using the dialer and the cloud calling system. If I click on Olga, for example, I don't have any phone information for Olga. There's no contact information there. This is grayed out, so I wouldn't be able to call Olga from the UI or from the Chrome extension because I don't have her phone number uploaded into the account. Another thing that you can do with the cloud calling feature if I go back into the Chrome extension, if I go back to the main menu, there is a dialer as well. So if you have cloud calls enabled, you can actually make one-off calls using the dialer. So even if someone is not in a campaign where they've moved on to the call step.
And call really quick, we can just show them that it works.
Okay, that's good. Okay, what's your phone number, Josh?
You want to stop sharing the screen for a moment?
Sure.
And I will text it to you. There we go. Let me pull you up.
You don't know my phone number either.
You're in my contacts here. There we go.
And your favorites. Oh, there you go. All right. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to use my custom caller ID.
Oh, well, that's the wrong number.
Oh. Okay, let me try this again. Okay, here we go.
And there it is. Comes from her caller ID as well. So yeah, they're not going to see the rental number or anything. It's going to look like you are the one actually calling them. So just in case people can see.
There we go. All right. A couple other things I did want to point out, especially if you are using the different channels within your campaign. If you are using the SMS option in a sequence, we do have an SMS inbox in your reply account. So this is where all of your replies go to from your prospects if they're replying to your SMS messages within your campaign. We also have reporting specific to emails, but also to calls and tasks. So if I open up calls reporting right here, we can see, you know, the people who on the team who are making the calls, how many calls they've made, average duration, total call time, etc. And then if I go into task reporting, I have access to all that reporting as well. So just wanted to point that out to you. And then Josh, yeah, I think you're going to go over best practices.
Yeah, one last thing before I pick it up. If you want to just quickly run a LinkedIn search just to show people how that works, you get a question about that earlier.
All right, are we just doing a general search?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go to find emails.
So once you hit find emails, it's always going to open up a LinkedIn tab of its own. The question was specifically about not pulling in contacts anymore. So that could be one of two things. Either you've hit your limit, so it does run a limit of 200 searches for the month if you're not paying for the upgraded version. So that would prevent you from pulling anybody else through. The other usual common quirk here is if you are opening LinkedIn first before you hit the find emails button, sometimes it can get its wires crossed and it doesn't pull in from the correct LinkedIn tab. So you always want to make sure that you do not have a LinkedIn window open. You hit find emails, it will open its own default window, and then you can run your own search from the window that it's opened and kind of take it from there.
Yeah. And also when you are running a LinkedIn, if you're doing a bulk search, the default search parameters are always VP of sales. So you can change this, you can add your own filters. You will notice that in the Chrome extension, it is starting to pull contacts on page 1. If you want page 2 contacts, you can just always navigate to page 2. What you can then do is anyone who you've checked off, you can then save them to your reply account, or you can even move them directly into a sequence or directly into a list in your reply account as well.
Yeah, so a very good way to supplement any lists that you have. We are building out our own databases, but for now, we can't guarantee that you're going to get hits on every single search that you run. And we would rather give you a blank. So for example, Eddie Tung here, has no email assigned to him. That's because we could not verify it for you, and we'd rather give you a blank than a bunch of potential bounces. So depends on the search that you're actually running will affect your results. And I'm going to apologize in advance. The dog upstairs is running laps. So if you can hear him or hear barking, I sincerely apologize. But with that, we'll dive a little bit into the best practices. And Stephanie, if you just want to open up just the sequence again that you had set up there, we can just look at that while I jabber on.
All right.
So essentially, your tech stack is a set of tools, and it's only as powerful as the hands that wield it. So just because you have these assortment of step types at your disposal, it doesn't necessarily mean that every single one of them is going to be applicable for your particular situation. So just randomly throwing in a number of call steps or LinkedIn steps isn't necessarily going to guarantee a higher rate of conversion off of your sequences. It's all about planning and figuring out what your goals are for your particular sequence, and then using the proper tools to help leverage what's at your disposal. So typically, you want to create an air of realism and legitimacy. People at this stage know that email automation exists. So a campaign that's purely email based isn't necessarily going to net you the best results. So in order to help create the illusion of kind of that manual effort, you can use things like a LinkedIn step to help set the context for your sequences, and that'll drive up initial engagement. So typically you want to have a view profile step or something akin to that as your step one, and start off by kind of just hitting that profile, maybe sending them a message or sending them that connection request. And now they have a name and a face associated with the emails that you're going to be sending either hours later or maybe the day later. And because LinkedIn is inherently manual based, they're going to assume that any touch points surrounding that are also manual. So that's going to give you a bit more attention on your initial email than you would have if you just kind of messaged them out of the blue there. And again, it doesn't have to be LinkedIn specifically. You can drop voicemails as well, though in today's day and age, calling, especially cold calling, can have more of a negative connotation. And I know personally that if I see a number that I don't immediately recognize, I simply don't pick it up. So LinkedIn tends to have higher results. You can even go a Facebook route if you want to take an even more manual approach. Just something that's going to, again, add context to your initial messages. Then you want to hit a couple of emails. Again, the bread and butter of the platform. It's a common sales practice, but you want to write them in a way that has a more conversational style. You want these messages to sound like they're coming from you, as opposed to just throwing out a bunch of information about your company, and then kind of hoping that they're excited about what you're selling. It's all about trying to build that conversation and build that trust between you and this stranger. And then hoping that over time, the trust comes to a point where they can click on your links or look at your attachments, open those PDFs, and respond to you and engage with you in a more one-to-one nature, as opposed to just spewing that information out. Once you have a few email steps in your kind of pocket, then you want to utilize things like your calls or SMS. And you want to base these more around perceived interest, as opposed to just placing them in an arbitrary point. If I put in a call step at step 4, for instance, and I go through my entire list and call every single one of them, even if they've never opened my messages, I'm spending a lot of time hitting people that aren't necessarily going to answer the phone or be interested at all, even if I do get them on the line. Instead of just putting them at an arbitrary point, you can have the notification here to remind you, but instead you actually want to go to the people tab and sort by views. And that way, all the people that have clicked a certain number of times or viewed your messages a certain number of times will appear right up at the top. And you can kind of sift through your list from that point and hit the people that have come back, however often you're seeing that. Usually, as a rule of thumb, I say if they've viewed your emails more than you've delivered, that's a pretty good indicator of interest. And those are the people that you should be focusing on, as opposed to just blanket calling every single person. It's going to save you time, and you're going to find the rate of conversions higher because your team isn't getting demoralized by just leaving voicemails all the time.
Yeah,
So
especially if you compare it to, like if you have your list of contacts who, haven't even opened the emails that you've sent to them. Odds are, if you go to call those people and they're maybe not expecting that call, they're probably not going to have time to talk to you. Or like you said, Josh, you're just going to be leaving a bunch of voicemails for them.
yeah. And you're also inserting yourself into their lives, which is a lot more intrusive than just a LinkedIn step or an email. So you do want to be a lot more kind of prepared or intelligent with your use of the calls, because you can potentially annoy someone by maybe calling them in the middle of the day when they're in a meeting. And then it may have nothing to do with what you're selling, but you've now kind of turned them off of you completely just because of your timing. So looking at your view count and then prioritizing those individuals that have viewed a certain number of times is a much better practice overall than just randomly sending those messages. We got a couple of questions in here. I'll try out opening reply first. What do you do if you find people on LinkedIn but there's no email into their profile? Yeah, we've already actually answered that one. I will circle back on it in a little bit. But essentially, we don't give you all of the emails simply because we could not verify them.
Yeah, and I mean, another reason that the emails may not be populating, if someone doesn't have, for example, their corporate email associated with their LinkedIn account. And I realized a couple of weeks ago that I actually don't have my work email associated with my LinkedIn. So I tried to run a search on myself and it didn't populate. And then I went into my LinkedIn account and I realized that I don't have it in there. So that's another reason why emails may not populate.
Yeah, and you'll also find just a common thing. If you're searching for a very specific company, we may not be able to find any of them simply because they're not in any databases that we're currently working with. And it is common. We're always trying to update our databases. So if you come back and run the same search maybe a week later, there's a chance that you might get hits that second time through. So don't be discouraged if you're not getting hits immediately. But as for the best practices in the email steps themselves, we've talked about LinkedIn, we've talked about the calls. Things like SMS, functionally, they work the same way as emails. They just get sent directly from the number that you've rented. It's a very tricky situation how you want to capitalize on SMS. As I said, calls can be intrusive. SMS maybe even more so because these are people's personal numbers, and there's a hesitancy of answering things that they've never actually opted into. So for that, I would really stick with people that you have established relationships with, or that you know are comfortable actually getting these messages from you. People that have either opted in already, or that you know have like a phone number publicly available on LinkedIn. Otherwise, you do run the risk of getting not only your domain reputation kind of damaged, but just the number can burn out quite quickly as well. So
yeah, and I would have to agree with you there, Josh. If you've already established a connection with a prospect or a client, you've communicated before, maybe using their mobile number. I think I would be more likely to send an SMS in that scenario or in that situation. I don't know if I would be sending an SMS if it was like a complete cold lead. And I think it's the same thing, even like with a WhatsApp message. I think, if you know your audience, it's going to help a lot more. So for example, I spent some time in South America a couple of years ago, and WhatsApp is a huge communication tool in South America. Even for business, it's a huge business channel. So knowing your audience goes a long way. And like Josh was saying, if it's a warm prospect versus a cold prospect, that's going to go a long way too in deciding what channels you're going to use for sequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's all, again, just thinking through your plan. And for inbound, it makes sense. If people are signing up on your website and leaving all of their information, it makes sense to send an SMS, maybe congratulating them for signing up and saying, welcome to the family, or whatever the case is. But if you're cold calling people or cold messaging people, their phones is probably not the best place to do so.
Yeah.
Ron has a question here. LinkedIn messages has a limit of 60. I'm assuming that's words. Will this be the same when you send a message in LinkedIn via reply? It is. We are sending the emails or the messages directly from LinkedIn. So any limitations from LinkedIn side will still be applicable when you're using the messages on our side. So the last kind of section for these multi-channel features is going to be Zapier. And this is actually a very customizable step, and I can steal the screen from you for a little bit, Stephanie.
Yeah, go for it.
So essentially, depending on what platforms you are trying to integrate with, I do remember someone mentioned Active Campaign. Through something like Zapier, you can connect and bridge those different tools. The main difference between the step in the actual sequences and the just normal Zapier connections is when the actions are triggered. So on Zapier, you will select your tools. Right now I have Salesforce connecting to reply. From there, I have an option to select any of the triggers from either Salesforce's end or reply's end, and then an associative action. Normally, any time that this happens, it's going to result in the action that you've selected. With the trigger in the actual email steps, or sorry, the campaigns, it will only trigger whenever that particular thing happens when it's on the Zapier step. So for example, if I have a Zapier step on step 3 of my campaign, I'm going to send LinkedIn first, 2 emails, and then it's going to wait for Zapier to trigger. It's only going to move the people from that Zapier step when this happens on that stage. So even if it's happened prior, so if people are, maybe a new record was created and then I want to mark them as finished, this can happen in the background as often as it wants, but it will only move the people from step 4 to step 5 if this triggers at that exact moment. So it's a way to kind of customize your Zapier connections to trigger at a very specific point to continue your sequences. And usually this is for like clicks or something like that. If you do have in your step, your second email, using the kind of metaphor that I've explained, if someone clicks on that second email, you can set it up so that it will then only move them to the follow-up step if they click at that specific time. So prior to this, they can click as many times as they want. They will continue as normal, but it has a little bit of an extra trigger involved if you implement it directly into the sequence. I understand that that sounds very complicated and may not make a ton of sense, but it's hard to display this because I can literally put in any tool in this system and run a search for it and possibly connect to it. So giving a very specific example is tough to do in a live setting because everyone's got such a very unique flow. I saw a question come through here.
Yeah, especially when it comes to Zapier, because there are so many options within Zapier to connect with reply.
Can you elaborate on the LinkedIn step? What is the main reason for it and what does it actually do? So Stephanie, if you want to just share your screen again.
Yeah.
So essentially LinkedIn can perform one of 4 actions for you. It can view profiles, it can send in-mail messages, it can send connection requests, and it can send normal messages. So when you click on that, it'll give you the options. And essentially you are pre-creating a template for your messages, so to speak. So if we had the message option selected, when you look at your task and you have the profile of the person's LinkedIn assigned to their contact in reply, you can then hit send message, send connection request, view profile, and then it will perform that action for you. So it's not going to completely automate what you're doing on LinkedIn, but it's going to help speed up that process quite a bit. So as opposed to manually running searches for every single person on your list, you'll already have the profiles ready. And then you can just go through your list one at a time, hitting send message, send message, send message. and it takes you a fraction of the time it would take otherwise.
Yeah. And if you are using like the LinkedIn message option, for example, when you do go into your Chrome extension and you click on that contact, if it is a LinkedIn message step, that message dialog box will show up and you can edit that message. So you can create a pre-populated message in your step. And then if you want to edit it a bit more for more personalization before you actually click, send message and complete, you do have the option to do that as well.
Yeah. So again, if you want to just click on a person that we have in here, just anyone on the main people page. Just to show everyone exactly where the LinkedIn profile needs to be. So yeah, you do want to have the email in this field specifically, the profile for their LinkedIn account. And then as long as it's there in the tasks that are created for LinkedIn specifically, that button will appear. You simply click that button and it will send out either the message, it'll view the profile, whatever option that you've selected. Yeah. And one other thing that I wanted to mention about just best practices is, while I said that you don't want to just throw in random steps for the sake of them because they exist, you do want to hit on as many fronts as possible to increase the chances of people being comfortable with how you're reaching out to them. Not everyone's going to spend as much time on their computers, in their email accounts as Stephanie or myself. It's our job. We have to. But people may just be more receptive to a LinkedIn message. Some people, depending on your location or the type of situation that they're in, may in fact be more comfortable with an SMS. It's just about putting in the time and effort to understand who you're reaching out to. All of these steps tend to lose efficacy the larger your list is. It's unreasonable to assume that you're going to send a LinkedIn message to every single one of 5,000 people in your list. In that case, you should bull through with your email steps and probably look for other avenues or outlets to use. But if you're using a small or dedicated group of people that's very segmented and you know exactly who these people are, you can take the time to hit that button 50 times a day, or send them a couple of voicemails, give them that air of reality, and you're going to see the results. I actually had a client that I'm currently working with send manual paper letters to people after they reached a certain step in their sequences. Obviously, we don't have a step for paper letters, but the point
I
is,
love getting letters in the mail.
Yeah.
That's not a bill. I love it.
He took the time to understand his audience and do something outside of the box to help increase his rate of conversion. And now I'm not saying everyone needs to start sending real letters. That is incredibly time consuming and a lot of effort, but the point still stands. You're hitting on multiple fronts and creating this air that you are in fact an actual person, and people are going to understand that. They're going to be able to feel that effort and respond in kind.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to creating your sequence, if you're using the different channels, try your best to kind of mimic the way that you would reach out if you were doing it not using automation. So if you were manually doing it, if you were, manually sending an email to someone and then manually viewing their LinkedIn profile, if you're creating a multi-channel sequence that is kind of phone call, SMS, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, and then there's 20 different steps all happening, I think it may signal some sort of automation to your prospects. So, we say this even in terms of best practices when you're creating just email campaigns and just, the style and the way that you're writing, mimic your natural writing style. Also, if you're using multi-channel, mimic your natural outreach style. As if you weren't using any automation, it will come across as more personal and you will see a bigger return on that.
Are we allowed to add multiple contact numbers of a prospect in reply.io? We only have one phone number field, and that is what's going to automatically come up whenever you use the dialer or the little phone icon in the profiles. You can add custom fields to add other phone numbers, but by default, it's one number per field, And that's the only one that automatically gets pulled in. So if you're looking for more automation or the option to select, unfortunately at this time, no.
There is a question from the chat. I want to know how to set up a LinkedIn follow-up step. How can I set it up with my LinkedIn account and the specific contact we want to approach?
So if you want to just share your screen again, we did talk about that early on. And once you just bring it up, I'll kind of walk through it again here. Yeah, now is the time for questions, people. If you have anything, maybe a specific use case that you want a little bit more insight to, feel free to chime in, and we will get it answered for you. So essentially, when you get to a task step in a sequence, in this instance, it will be LinkedIn, a task will get created and it will appear in this little side window in your Chrome extension, and it will have the associated LinkedIn symbol and everything like that. All you would need to do is then click into that particular task. So if you want to just click into one of the WhatsApps, the look will be very much akin to this.
Yeah.
Aside from WhatsApp, it will just have the LinkedIn logo. Whatever message that you've written in advance will be displayed here, and you can use variables just like you were using them in your regular email steps. Then all you would need to do is hit the associated send LinkedIn message. So where it says send WhatsApp message, that'll just say LinkedIn instead, and it will instantly send to the profile that you have in that contact in the LinkedIn field. It will send this message to that URL as soon as you hit the button. For WhatsApp, it's going to function very similarly, but you do have to log into your own WhatsApp account every time you hit the button, just so it's not sending from some random WhatsApp account. So it's not, again, it's not pure automated. It's not going to just send the messages on their own. It does need to be, that button does need to be clicked in order for it to actually go out. But yeah, sir, I hope that answers your question.
One thing that I also wanted to point out, and I'll mention it really quickly, if you are using our Salesforce native integration, and if you are utilizing calls or tasks in your campaigns, we can sync calls and tasks within that integration to your Salesforce account. Right now, it's currently available in beta. So if you go to your account settings and click on beta and enable those beta features, which they are in George's account, you will see that we can sync calls and tasks to Salesforce via that integration. So just want to let you know that while we're talking about multi-channel.
Correct. And there was a question earlier that asked about our Salesforce plugin. This is only available in the native integration. The plugin is only going to give you a couple of buttons in Salesforce that allow you to move contacts from Salesforce into Reply. No other functionality from that. And while we're here as well, we recently implemented triggers. So if you want to just click on that on the left there very briefly, that's under email accounts. Just underneath that, there's triggers.
Oh yeah, triggers.
Yeah, it's very new. It's also in beta.
It's also in beta.
So this functions very similarly to kind of how I described Zapier. You are going to be applying a set of different actions and triggers, and then it will functionally move them from one location to another whenever this trigger is activated. So if you want to just hit the drop down there just to give people a look at what options we have. This is still in testing, so we will obviously be building out new ones in the future. But for now, the list is still pretty robust. And so what this is really used for is essentially capitalizing on interactions. So the one that we have here, the example contact reply to sequence email, you can move people that respond automatically into a follow-up campaign based on the response. And then you don't you can be hands off essentially at that point. Currently, you do need to move them manually from one location to another. And you do have to manually follow up on any emails that you get incoming. This will help kind of speed up a lot of the processes and smooth out the transition from one location to the next, simply by setting up the appropriate triggers that apply to you and moving them between those different sequences. I've seen people utilize it for clicks. Again, that's not something that's available for everyone, but here we go. If people are showing that interest, if they are clicking on some of your attachments or anything like that, you can capitalize on that, move them to a follow-up that's been customized to capitalize on that type of engagement, as opposed to just writing something very generic and, again, hoping for the best.
Yeah, and these would come in handy. I mean, when Josh and I, when we talk about best practices, we always really encourage our customers to re-nurture. So, Josh touched on it before about, taking a look at the people in your campaigns and, seeing who has viewed those emails multiple times and re-nurture those contacts. Something like triggers would come in handy, and it would just kind of really work to automate that process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so again, it is in testing. So if not all of the options are available today, feel free to let us know. And now is the time. We are still building it out, so we can definitely throw your recommendations into the ring. Eric Delgadillo says, when you make the outbound call using the extension, does it ring or bridge your phone first before it calls out if you have your cell phone saved in the settings? It will not bridge the call to your actual number. It's going to call from the app, from the rental number. It's just masking that rental number with the number of your choice. So it's not actually going to be coming from your phone or anything. It will be through your computer.
Yeah, we did have a feature previously where it did kind of ping the contact number that you had before it kind of issued or connected that call. But with the cloud calling feature that we have now, like Josh said, it just calls directly from the app. It just mimics, a normal phone call. There are no notifications or triggers before that call goes out.
Yeah. Anonymous attendee, nice name. What if you don't want to move all responded contacts? Are you able to select only the ones that are relative? You probably don't want to move people that say thank you, but no thank you. And the answer is yes. This middle section here, so it says when is going to be the trigger point. If is going to be the specific subgroup of people that this trigger affects. So you can actually select inbox category. That may not be available right now, but I do know that it's coming. I ran into this same question a little bit earlier today. But ideally, you would be able to select inbox category equals interested, not interested, things like that. And then it will only apply to those people. So yeah, if someone says opt out, remove me from your list, or decides to be a bit more vulgar than that, obviously you can exempt them from your trigger, or you can set up a campaign specifically for them if that's what you want.
And you can add multiple conditions right here. So it's very similar to when you're creating filters, because if you notice right here, these properties are pretty much the same properties as when you are creating filters within your campaigns or your account to segment out a certain subset of contacts.
Yeah, exactly. So if it's not here today, hopefully it will be there soon. We have another question. Can we manually move people between steps within the sequence, i.e. step 1 to step 2? The answer is yes. You can trigger it to move them from one step further. You just can't move them back. If they've received any steps in that particular campaign, you cannot resend them those same messages. You would have to then duplicate the sequence and move them to the copy. We do have safeties in place that prevent you from doubling up on the same emails from the same sequences. Way earlier on, we ran into people kind of just recycling the campaigns over and over and over again. And yeah, we work in automation. We try to avoid spam.
As much as we can.
As much as we can.
Okay, let's see if there's any more questions.
Essentially in the, Stephanie, if you want to share your screen again, sorry for making you do all the work this time.
All right.
Just go to a sequence. Any of them, it doesn't matter.
Okay, we'll just do this one right here.
So this is how you manually move them. The trigger will take care of it by itself, but for the most part, it's the similar process. Hit people. And so all you would do is select the checkbox next to someone that shows up. So Nick, for example, and then hit the paper airplane icon. and then you can move them. You would select the sequence and just move them to the step of your choice. For this instance, you can remove them. So in the same sequence, you can remove them from the list. So for Nick, remove. So we're not going to do it because this is George's campaign, but you would remove Nick from the sequence entirely, and then you would move them back into the same sequence, but you can select which step that you want to move them to. So one additional step, but it can be done. Do you add the trigger as a step in the specific campaign, or does it automatically just apply to all campaigns? It does apply automatically to all campaigns, unless you specify a sequence in that condition section, so in that little middle filter.
Yeah, because if you take a look at your, that trigger is in your campaign settings. So everything in this black bar is account wide. So that definitely would apply across your account. But like Josh said, if you go into triggers and if you really kind of work within those conditions and, specify which context, then you should be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that covers most of what we wanted to talk about today. If there are any other questions that are coming through, now is the time. Hopefully I don't have to force Stephanie to
share my screen again. It's always when I close it, you're like, oh, by the way, can you share your screen?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just going to check the chat as well before we wrap up. I think this is the first time that we're not going to after our 1 hour.
Mm-hmm. Jean, if I miss a task, will the sequence continue with the next step automatically? Do I have to do something manually to the task? So we did mention this briefly earlier on. There is a setting in each of your sequences individually. It's called calls handling, and then there's a separate one called tasks handling. You want to touch both of these, and there's going to be an option for manual or automatic. By default, they're all set to manual, meaning you do have to mark the task as completed in order for the individual contacts to move from one step to the next. If you set to automatic, it will essentially just run through all of the tasks as if they were already done. It's not going to bother actually verifying if you've done them or not.
Yeah. And so just before we wrap up, Josh, you were talking about best practices a couple minutes ago. I think when you are using multi-channel sequences, Josh had mentioned that, if you have 1,000 people in a campaign or a sequence, maybe that's not the best option for multi-channel. Instead, if you have highly targeted smaller sequences, that would be a perfect use case for using multi-channel.
Yeah, again, think of reply as a hammer. It can just nail down as many emails as you want if you want to use it that way. And it can definitely be effective. We've seen many a client run campaigns with just a long list of email steps with a massive amount of prospect emails, and they've gotten the conversions. It's all about kind of just planning ahead, thinking about what you actually want out of the sequence. And if you're working in a very niche industry, you are probably better off targeting people that are going to be a bit more receptive out of the gate than just getting a massive generic list and throwing in a bunch of supplementary task steps just because the tool allows you to do so. You want to use the right tool for the right job. And while reply can be used for a lot of different jobs, you do want to take into consideration what the end result you want is.
Yeah. All right, so I just checked. I can't see any more questions.
We did get one here. What if I want to add the LinkedIn step to the sequence, but I don't have a LinkedIn profile imported? I use another email search service. Is there any way to add it with reply? You can manually add them. Like, the profiles are available for you to manually touch up whenever you want to. So you can just copy and paste them. You can also add them in a long list in a CSV and then import it that way. So there's nothing preventing you from manually updating them once they're already in reply. It will not create duplicates. We run searches based on email address. So if you're importing people with the same email address, we will update the existing record instead of creating a brand new one. So that's probably the best way to update from there. Again, if you don't have the LinkedIn URL to the profile, it will not do anything. it's just going to act as a reminder to perform the function outside of reply. It does require the profile URLs to function.
Yeah, and like Josh was saying earlier, if you are on your tasks page in your Chrome extension, if there is a contact who has reached that LinkedIn step, but you don't have the LinkedIn URL, it will open LinkedIn and it's going to give you a list of any name that kind of meets that criteria. If you click on that contact in LinkedIn, you will have the option to save their LinkedIn URL in their prospect profile in the Chrome extension.
Absolutely. Yeah. I see people are starting to trickle off. If there are no further questions, we will kind of cap it here. But thank you all for coming as usual. Expect to see us again in a couple weeks. Yeah. And if you have any recommendations on what we should cover, feel free to drop us a line and we'll take a look.
And this session has been recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel, but for anyone who has registered, so whether they attended or not, we will be sending out a recording to everyone on that email list. So see you in a couple weeks, guys. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye.